Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Sandy, the Chief Economist of Moody's Analytics, and got an action-packed podcast for you. I'm joined by my two co-hosts and colleagues, Ryan Sweet. Ryan, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark. How are you?
Good. You sound good. And of course, Ryan is the Director of Real-Time Economics. And then we've got the Deputy Chief Economist, Cris. Hey, Cris, how are you?
Doing well.
Good.
How
You're
you doing,
in the
Mark?
office, I see.
Yep.
Good.
I'm
good.
alone here, but
Are you all alone? Really?
Yeah,
No one's
yeah.
there? No.
I think that maybe there's one other person, but we'll see.
Well, you're getting a lot of work done, I assume.
Yep.
Good. That's the way it should be. And John Leer. John, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, great to be here.
John is you're the Chief Economist,
Chief
right?
Economist of Morning Consult.
Morning Consult. Yeah, it's fantastic. We're very excited to have you. We gotten to know each other during the pandemic. We did some work together, survey-based work back in the beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I was looking through that recently, actually. That holds up pretty well.
Does it? What? I can't remember. What did we say?
Well, we highlighted a lot and the really dramatic income differences that the pandemic was disproportionately affecting low-income people, that women and women parents in particular were disproportionately affected. They were dropping out of the labor force at higher rates. And then I think the surprising result was how robust entrepreneurism remained in the face of rising cases.
Right.
That, we saw a lot of people still wanting to start businesses, and a lot of that has borne out over the last year.
And as I recall, we were surprised by that when we saw it
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
survey. Like,
Correct.
We actually, I was in question, is something wrong with their survey? But no, you're right. That's right. That came out in the survey results. But it's wonderful to have you. Great to have you. Maybe you could take a minute and just give the listener a sense of Morning Consult, because that might be new to folks. And
Sure.
And I'd love to hear your path to how did you become Chief Economist of Morning Consult? How did that happen?
Yeah. Sure. So I'll start with Morning Consult. Morning Consult is a global data intelligence company. So every day we're conducting 35,000 interviews across, I think we're in 45 countries now every day. And the surveys cover a range of topics. So I focus on our economic surveys: confidence, employment, personal finances, inflation. But then a lot of our business focuses on brand intelligence. So what do consumers think about different brands, different issues, and how is that likely to impact their spending activities? So it's a really exciting company because we're sort of pairing this real-time data analysis. I should say we're pairing this real-time data with sort of cutting edge analysis. So bringing on a team of machine learning experts and econometricians and artificial intelligence to try to pair the two together.
Great. And you guys, you're a privately held company? I can't remember. Or did you go public or something?
We are a privately held company.
Okay.
We raised our Series B last year at $1 billion valuation. So that was really exciting. And we continue to grow. We started the pandemic with 120 employees, and we just passed 500 recently. So It's been this sort of crazy growth, and there's a lot of room to expand. So if folks are interested, we still have a lot of job openings.
Yeah, well, you know what? I remember John called me when the Series B was going out, and because he knew he was going to be expanding, and basically he said, "I need to hire people." And I said to him, "John, don't hire my people."
That's right. I remember that.
Remember that, John. I'll help you out here, but don't hire my people. Thank you, John. You've been very gracious in that regard. But it's great.
No, it's been great. Yeah, we just recently hired Scott Brave, who was at the Chicago Fed for a long time doing he does a lot of nowcasting work, real-time nowcasting. And then we brought in Lori Hellwing from Point72 to do a lot of our sort of Wall Street analysis and financial services analysis.
Oh, Point72, that's the hedge fund Steve Cohen.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Yeah, I visited them once, and it was, it was high intensity.
Yes.
It was high intensity. Yeah, interesting place. Oh, that's fantastic. And so how did you find your way to Morning Consult?
Yeah, I think through a somewhat circuitous route, as is the case with a lot of people when they find a startup. So before working at Morning Consult, I was living in Germany. I lived in Berlin for 4 years, and I studied economics there. I was getting my master's. I was kind of on the fence about coming back to the US. I previously worked for a company called Promontory, doing a lot of credit risk analysis.
Great company.
It's a great company. 2009, 2010, banks were failing. It is not that long ago when we had all those troubles in the financial services sector. And I was thinking about is now a good time to come back to the US? And I happen to know the CEO of Morning Consult, and he reached out to me and said, we've got some data. We've been running the exact same 5 questions as the University of Michigan, except for instead of doing it 600 per month, we're doing 6,000 a day across, I think at that time it was 15 countries. What do you think? Is there something here? Is there there basically? And so I said, okay, this seems like a good enough reason for me to pack my bags and come back over to the US, and I'll spend a few months diving in and figuring out what the data looks like. And so I started, I think somewhat skeptically, thinking, well, I don't know what, this is at the time, the company really wasn't doing a lot of economic research. So it was, for me, it was sort of a change of pace, a change of tone. And the data that I saw just helped us predict a couple really important events, particularly in late 2018 and 19. I don't know if you remember, but the Fed sort of had this start and stop approach where they totally changed gears. And I think there was an instance where if they had seen maybe some of that data right before their meeting, maybe they would have seen things a little differently. And so I thought, okay, this could be really valuable. And I think that high frequency cross-country macro data is going to be more valuable over time. And I think probably some of this volatility that we see now with the pandemic, I think that that's probably more a feature than it has been historically. And so I thought, yeah, let me attach myself to this rising star.
Cool. And when was that? How long ago was that?
I started, so I did this sort of initial data analysis work in the summer of 2019, and I joined full-time in the fall of 2018.
Oh, so not that long ago. That's great.
Not that long ago. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing I find that kind of attracted me quickly to Morning Consult was the fact that you take the University of Michigan survey that does it twice a month, I believe 500 respondents, better than I. And you do it every single day, and you have 5,000 respondents.
Yeah.
And then you can break down the results into all kinds of demographics.
So we dive in deep: income, geography, generation, and there are certain points, political affiliation. There are points in time where different demographics matter more than others. And you just have to have the large sample sizes and that demographic depth to be able to do that work. One of the things that's been really exciting for us is just starting to use the features of the high frequency data to start doing more and more forecasting and nowcasting.
It's great to have you. Well, here's the game plan, John. So I want to talk about Russia, Ukraine, because that's top of mind. And I know you guys, we just saw, Cris, you passed around a survey your survey of different attitudes towards, I think, Russia across the world. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit. And then we're going to play our statistics game, and I'll describe that when we get to it. Always a lot of fun. I'm usually the winner of this game, John. You should know. And there's a special cowbell for me, just for Mark. But we'll play that game. And then I do want to dive into more of your survey work. Obviously, consumer sentiment is very dour.
Yes.
At least by the University of Michigan survey, it's very dour, and I assume you're showing the same results. But I want to talk about that and why, and what's going on, and what does it mean. And I know you're doing lots of other surveys, and we can dive into that. I think we could talk for 3 days, but we'll keep it to an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. So with that, let's talk about Russia, Ukraine, and maybe I'll turn to Cris first. Cris, what is your sense of this? We're doing economic forecasting. We have to make assumptions around events like this and what it means. What should be in our baseline scenario? By the way, we had a podcast a couple of days ago with Gaurav Ganguly, the guy who runs our operations in Europe, around this issue. I thought it was very informative. But Cris, do you want to just give people a sense of how we're thinking about things and how this might play out and what it might mean for the economy? We can then turn to John's survey results.
Sure. So I guess first and foremost, the situation continues to evolve, right? So our views continue to evolve as well. But from a baseline view, I believe I'd sum up the view as status quo, that there will continue to be this tension, certainly between Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the rest of the world around the status of Ukraine. The troop buildups and movements will continue for a while. But we fall short of an actual full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine as a whole. A good chance that they do take over the eastern part of the country, the Donbas regions, which are already under their influence to a large degree, but unlikely that they would go much beyond that. That's at least our baseline working assumption.
So there is an invasion or incursion,
Right,
pick your word,
conflict, yes.
but it's limited to the eastern provinces where the Russian-speaking population is large, and they do not go all the way to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine.
Correct. At least in terms of military force, right? There will continue to be provocations. Russia is very likely to continue to insert itself in Ukrainian politics, winning the information campaign, if you will. But in terms of a military effort, our baseline suggests that they will not go beyond that region.
And in the baseline, what's the macro impact of that on the Russian economy, on the European economy, on our U.S. economy?
So then we get into the question of the European response or Western response. Do you expect sanctions? If this does occur, the only way there would be no sanctions or a retreat of sanctions at this point would be some type of peace agreement, or if Russian troops back off entirely. So there will be some response, but under this scenario, it's likely to be somewhat targeted. Right, certain individuals, certain banks, perhaps certain parts of the financial system, but nothing full scale in terms of a strong response, unless there was a full scale incursion. So we expect the Russian banks, for example, will continue to be members of the SWIFT network. They will continue to be able to conduct financial transactions across borders. But certain individuals are likely to be sanctioned, much as was done after the Crimean conflict. The price of oil, price of gas is likely to remain quite volatile, elevated, especially if there is this initial incursion, as I've described. There's undoubtedly oil and gas prices will rise. If it stops, though, if Russia doesn't go beyond that region, then it's likely that we will see things stabilize and calm over time, but unlikely that oil prices would retreat to levels that we had prior to the last couple of months, unless we have other supplies coming online. So there might be supply responses from the U.S., Middle East that could increase and lower the price of oil, but in terms of the conflict itself, the impact on prices is likely to remain high. We expect that the Nord Stream 2 project will continue to move forward. Very important, of course, for European nations.
That's the pipeline from Russia to Europe that is
correct.
I think it's been built. It just hasn't been actually opened yet.
Turned on.
So
again, because of the importance to Europe and how vulnerable Europe is from an energy standpoint, they really can't afford not to import that gas. So that's likely to move ahead. And as I said, in terms of financial markets, there's likely to be this risk premium. The Russian economy will continue to remain under stress, but over time, that impact should be lessened.
So it sounds pretty modest. I mean, obviously on Europe, it'll be more of a deal because of the higher natural gas prices, and 1/3 of their natural gas comes from Russia. But for the U.S., rest of the global economy, kind of not that big a deal in this scenario where they
in this very specific baseline scenario. We could certainly paint a darker picture, and we have.
My sense is that, and I'm curious, Ryan, what you think of this, that the conflict is already embedded in oil price to some degree.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah, we're sitting at $90 a barrel, let's say on WTI, West Texas Intermediate. If this had not happened, and the timing also matters because there was inventories of oil are already very low because of the demand supply dynamics in the oil market. So if you have no inventory, then you get an event like this, it amplifies the price effects. My guess is about $10 a barrel. We'd be closer to 80 maybe if we had not seen this. And translate that, Ryan, does that sound about right to you? And can you translate that into, what it means for gasoline prices and what it means for, how much Americans are paying at the gas pump? I mean, I know I've got some heuristics in my mind. Do you have heuristics, rules of thumb that can help you with that, answer that question? Or you want me to take a crack at that? Or do you have a view on that? Have you thought about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, the thing that I pay really close attention to is wholesale gasoline prices. They lead prices that you and I pay at the pump by 2 weeks, and they point towards higher gasoline prices over the next couple of weeks. So I don't have. I mean, do you have what's your rule of thumb?
Well, for every $10, it's about 30 cents a gallon of gasoline
That
sustained.
sounds about right. Yeah.
And then every penny is about, I'm rounding, 1.5 billion in additional consumer spending over a year. So you do the arithmetic.
Reduction.
Oh yeah, reduction in consumer spending. So that gets you to no more than 50 billion. 50 billion is, 20.2%, 0.25 percentage points of GDP, a quarter point of GDP. How about that for?
That's good.
That was
Here,
good.
I'll throw some stuff on top of that.
Yeah.
So the impact might be muted by the $2.6 trillion that we have in excess savings,
True.
which is that additional savings that occurred, if we had kept pre-pandemic saving trends. And then also oil could be a net positive for other parts of the economy. So you're going to see mining or investment in mining shafts and wells, which is about 10% of non-residential structures investment. That's going to pop. So you could see, that part offset the drag from consumer spending.
So the bottom line here is that under the scenario where Russia invades and stops in the eastern provinces, that this is no big deal in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's not helpful, obviously. Inflation's already high. We're just adding to it. But it's not like a game-changing event in any respect.
No, I think one thing that Chris and I would probably have to sit down if this thing does escalate, we get a supply shock for oil. Typically, the Fed eases into supply shocks. This time around, they won't. That could magnify the impact on financial market conditions and then spill over into the economy.
So, John,
you had asked earlier, Mark, about whether or not financial markets had baked in sort of this risk premium, and I can tell you that consumers definitely are baking it in already. So we're starting to see pretty dramatic changes from November through January, with a growing share of Germans, Italians saying that they expect prices to continue to rise, that they think that they're going to have a hard time meeting their energy and utility bills. And as it so happens, those are also the countries that are more dependent on Russian gas than, let's say, France, which has gone a different direction and maintained a lot of this nuclear energy. So I think one of the things is it just exposes how volatile the energy situation is in Europe, even prior to this escalation.
Oh, that's interesting. So in your surveys across the world, you're seeing
That's right.
In those places that are more dependent on Russian oil gas, that people know this, and that they
Correct.
are more, their expectation is that I'm going to be paying a lot more than compared to a place like the United States, or you mentioned France, where they're not quite as reliant. Interesting.
Right. Yeah. Even not. I mean, you could use that as a simple test. Compare Germany and France as some sort of a shock, and see how two different countries respond differently to the shock.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Something that we should do. We should look at the share of consumer spending that goes towards natural gas, gasoline in European countries versus, in the U.S. Because in the U.S. it's about 1%. We spend 1% of our spendings on gasoline, roughly the same for natural gas. So it's really, really low.
Oh, is that right? I thought it was a bigger share of the pie than that.
It's dropped a lot. Since 2008, when we had the last big jump in oil prices, the share of consumer spending going towards gasoline has dropped quite significantly.
I think, Ryan, it's got to be more than that, right? Yeah, it's got to be 3-4%.
No,
because energy,
CPI
total
share.
energy CPI is 6-7%. Okay, this is where we bet.
Yeah,
I'm going to pull it up right now.
Yep, CPI,
right.
It's 6-7% of CPI, total energy though.
Yeah, but that includes a bunch of other things. I'm talking about just gasoline.
Yeah.
Fair.
Gasoline is a share of
transportation.
nominal spending. All right. You can discuss. I will look this up.
We'll discuss. Okay. All right. Hey, John, I know you also, Morning Consult, did a survey of attitudes towards Russia in different parts of the world, U.S. and different parts of the world. Can you give us a sense of what that told you or is telling us?
Yeah, certainly. So my colleague, Jason McMahon, who runs our geopolitical risk team, has been sort of leading the charge on this front, looking not only at how people view Russia, but also how Americans are thinking about military intervention, what share of Americans want to go in, under what conditions would they be more willing to go in. I think what's surprising to me is, like, we live in this hyper polarized world right now where seemingly Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything. And yet in this particular case, they all agree they don't want to go in. They would much rather prefer sanctions to any sort of real direct military intervention. And I think the only scenario where that changes is where Russia not only takes control of the eastern provinces, but actually invades all of Ukraine. And then Americans start saying, yeah, actually we should go in.
Oh, okay. So that's the line for most Americans. If they
That's
invade
right.
if they're in Kiev,
If they occupy all of Ukraine, then it warrants
troops.
U.S. troop intervention.
Okay.
That's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, more Democrats
That's right. Yeah.
leaned in that direction than Republicans, which I found interesting, right? It's not typically what we would think.
The other thing I took away from the survey was you did also ask Russians what they thought of all this. And the Russians were pretty supportive, I thought, weren't they, of the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges of, or not with the challenges, the insights that you get from doing surveys here is that you don't really know how people in Russia, China, India, Turkey, some of these countries that are a little bit more closed to outside media influences feel about the world. And so I think we continue to see that, Russians are generally supportive of Putin. I think they're less aware of the how close we are to a real pending military invasion than I think folks in the U.S. are, and that might be clouding their view of supporting the current path that Putin's taking.
Yeah, it made me think that this is another reason why Putin might invade, because politically, internally, it's playing pretty well. So he doesn't have like the population saying, I don't like this idea. They're saying, oh, okay, I'm okay with this idea.
Right.
At least, at least right now.
He's got a strong track record for what it's worth. I mean, I think the Crimea invasion built a lot of credibility. He showed that there's a way of doing it.
Yeah, interesting. The other thing that I found, and you may not have any idea of why. It just came out. I found it bizarre. The folks in India, the population of India, is very pro-Russian. At least in the context of this survey, did you notice that, or does that any insight there? Not that you should. I just found that very surprising. You see, I pour over your data.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm all in your data. I'm down into
I appreciate
DNA.
it. We love power use of our data, and there are a lot of insights in there. I think what's shocking to me is that it's not the case, that everyone blindly assumes that the U.S. and the policy approach that the U.S. is going to take is the right one. And I think doing these global surveys really reveals to you how much the U.S. doesn't. There are people out there that really don't trust U.S. and U.S. policy intervention.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, are you going to tell us I told you so, or what?
I got the numbers. So
Okay.
this time last year, it was a little bit less than 1.5%, but now it's up to 2% for gasoline as a share of total consumption.
Okay, I think you're more right than I was. I thought it was 3.
No,
4. This is total gasoline consumption.
As a share of nominal consumer spending.
Okay. All right.
And then electricity is 1.5%, and this is for the U.S. and natural gas is 0.5%.
Okay.
So
So
that gasoline
it adds up
share?
to 3 or 4%.
Yeah, you add it up.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, I
but if you
see,
look at just gasoline, that share
1.5 to
was
2.
3.5%, 4%, 2012, 2013. So we come down quite a bit.
Good. No, that's an interesting point. So you're saying, this isn't great for consumers, but it's not as bad as it used to be. And on
As it
top
used to
of
be,
that,
right?
we produce a lot of oil and natural gas. So those folks obviously benefit from the higher prices. So the net of all that
Correct.
is, this may not be as big a hit than some fear.
Correct.
At least through that link between what's going on. There's many others, financial markets, stock. You can see what's happening in the stock market.
Right.
It's down 10%. I don't think that's all Russia, Ukraine, but say it's only 5%. You do the arithmetic there. That's what is that? That's probably 5% of 50 trillion. That's 1.25. John, you see how good I am at this?
I know.
1.25 trillion down in household wealth. Because of the stock market. Probably.
But what I was going to say is, while gas as a share of total expenditures is not what it used to be, there's never a good time for a military intervention, but this is probably one of the worst times, where
Right.
households are already facing so many of these price pressures that this is just,
Great point.
exacerbating a lot of those underlying concerns.
And actually, gasoline prices, no worse thing to jack the price up and
Right.
really undermine consumer sentiment, which we'll come back to. But
Yep.
really, and also inflation expectations, I would assume,
Correct.
right? Because people really form their expectations based on what they see at the pump. If they're paying more at the pump, then they immediately think inflation is going to be higher.
That's why UMich, University of Michigan consumer confidence has gotten crushed recently. It's because the stock market, which it's very sensitive to, is down a lot and gasoline prices are up. That's like the worst recipe for UMich.
Well, maybe this is a good time to just take a dive there, John. Is your survey
Yeah.
saying the same thing then?
We're saying largely the same thing. I think one of the interesting footnotes from the University of Michigan survey was that decrease that they experienced most recently was entirely driven by people making over $100,000 per year. And so I think, inflation, stock prices certainly drive consumers, but they do tend to drive more well-off consumers than the average person. You think about people who make over $100,000 a year or more, it's about 30% of the US population. So I think it sort of overstates the case, but certainly what we're seeing is over the last 5 or 6 months, that if you were to go try to run a regression, which we're doing, and explain the drivers of daily consumer confidence, that things like gas prices, tips, inflation expectations, the market's inflation expectations, the stock prices matter more now than they have over the past, since the start of the pandemic, and that those things like COVID cases have essentially left consumers' calculation.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I took a trip for the first time since Omicron hit. It was in Atlanta, and I didn't see a mask. I mean, there was masks in the airport and on the plane, but outside of that, I didn't see a mask. I didn't see one mask.
Yeah, we saw really strong, negative correlations for the first 2 years, basically, where every time cases rose, confidence fell dramatically. I mean, it was like clockwork. And then slowly but surely over time, it took more and more cases to get a same level of decrease. There's a diminishing impact of cases essentially on consumer confidence. And it was always asymmetric. So falling cases never drove confidence higher. It just allowed consumers to go focus on other things, the employment situation, inflation, personal finance, and stuff like that. And so for me, it's great that COVID cases are in the past, but now we got to go focus on the actual underlying economy. And it's not clear to me that that's so positive that you're going to see some bounce back in consumer sentiment this year.
On the UMich survey, it's currently at its lowest level since the pandemic. You have to go all the way back to the early recovery after the financial crisis to find sentiment by that measure as low as it is today. Is that the same with the Morning Consult?
It's not the same. We're not as far down as we were at the depths of COVID. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of people, and we saw this in the January jobs report, for a lot of people, they're working, and wage gains have done a reasonably good job of keeping up with inflation. So if you're talking to people on the phone who tend to be a little bit older, tend to be a little bit wealthier, all of those inflation concerns are going to matter a lot more for them.
Yeah. Well, since we're on the subject, the one thing that I have found a bit perplexing, and maybe you can make sure I got the facts right here, is that despite the weaker sentiment, pick your measure, more Morning Consult, UMich, conference words, all weaker, doesn't seem to have affected consumer spending. Consumers, like Christmas, we saw the retail sales for January come out, and by the way, we'll get to the statistics game in just a second, but they were boom-like, and consumer spending retail sales year over year are like double digits. Some of that's price inflation, but
That's
even
right.
abstracting from that, that's pretty heady growth. So how do you square that circle, John, between the soft sentiment and the strong spending? I've never seen a disconnect like that before.
But I think part of it is, the premise. So I'll start you by fighting the premise, and then I'll fight the conclusion. So the premise is that consumer sentiment is, at record lows. I would say that's true, but the level is down. And actually what we have seen over the course of January and through February is that the change has not been so dramatic. In fact, it's been relatively constant. So I think that's one thing where I just push back that, I don't think we're in a tailspin where every day is worse than the day before.
Yeah.
And then the other side is just on the jobs growth. I mean, I think that we really are seeing a lot of, in particular, what we're seeing is a lot of lower income people looking for work, starting to work. I think that that's fueling a little bit more money in people's pockets. And some of that, like I said, or you said earlier, is driven by inflation, right? Those are nominal values.
Got it. Okay. But it sounds like that you think the consumer sentiment numbers will start to improve, become more consistent with the consumer spending numbers here going forward. That this gap is widened out for a range of reasons, but that gap will close going forward. Okay.
Yeah, I would expect. I mean, what we see is that in general, consumer sentiment tends to be highly responsive to downside risk, and then it takes a long time to recover. And so my sort of baseline is that we're going to need another 6 months of pretty steady economic improvements. And then I would say also on the policy front, we need, the Ukraine-Russia stuff is not doing us any favors. Any of that sort of uncertainty is what makes it harder and harder for consumers to upgrade their assessment of the economy.
Great. I did want to ask one kind of methodological question, and I promise we're going to get to the game soon, guys. I know Ryan's
the suspense is killing me.
Yeah, the suspense is killing him because I've got a great statistic. But the surveys you run, they're online, correct? They're online surveys.
Entirely online.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the other surveys, I think they're moving obviously more to online, but it can be a mix, online, phones. I don't think there's anyone doing paper anymore, is there, or actual phone calls?
So the conference board for a while was doing mail-in surveys, and then they changed in March to doing online surveys. And I know that Richard Curtin at the University of Michigan has a few proposals out there where they're thinking about moving online, but I think maintaining the continuity of that time series. They're trying to figure out a way to do that while maintaining the continuity of the time series.
Oh, so they're still using phone calls.
They're still calling people, right? So you've got to think about a lot of response rates. I mean, that was basically the premise of Morning Consult was the future of survey research is going to be driven by addressing this really significant problem with decreasing response rates. If you go look at 25 to 34-year-old women, they do not pick up the phone from random numbers. And so you've got to find a way to deal with that. And I think one way is to talk to 6,000 people every day.
Well, either do 60-year-old white men either. They don't pick up the phone.
That's right.
Yeah. So
there's certain populations that are that disproportionately don't answer unknown numbers.
So is there any
They might
difference?
not go online either, right?
What's that?
They might not go online.
They might not go online. I think one of the premises, particularly in the US, is that the online population is growing. Online penetration is pretty high and growing. And then as we think about the developing economies, a similar sort of thing is going on there, particularly as people are on their phones more and more.
Do you think of any bias?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Exact same question I was going to ask. Go ahead, Chris, ask.
Coming back to the the Russian opinion poll statistics, especially, right? How much confidence do you have in that number, for example? Russians saying that, they support the efforts, but it's all online, and we know there are cyber attacks and people watching, right?
I mean, so if I were in Russia, it would be very hard for me to say that I didn't support something that Putin was doing. And I think that's probably true online or over the phone. And the same is true in Turkey or China or some of these other more authoritarian regimes. In the case of the US, where we're fortunate enough to live in a fairly free liberal democracy, what we tend to see is that people, particularly on things that are really sensitive, so things like somebody's personal finances or the health of their marriage, or even their voting history, they tend to be a little bit more willing to tell the computer what they're thinking or what they're planning on doing, as opposed to phone surveys.
So you don't think there's any systematic bias? There's biases in every survey.
There's biases in every economic measurement. I'd take a step back. Every economic measurement has error.
Sure.
But you're saying, the biases here are no worse than and probably better than the kind of the traditional way of calling people or taking mail-in survey results.
That's right. And it's just the frequency and timeliness of it
Frequency,
too.
timeliness. Yeah. Yeah. That's intuitive to me. Okay. Let's play the game. Okay. Can I go first?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
So here's the game, John. So the game is we each lay out a statistic, and the rest of the group tries to figure out what it is through deductive reasoning. For the non-guest, that's us. The statistic has to be from this past week. So anything that happened this past week.
Oh,
And
okay.
the best statistic is one that's not so easy that it's a slam dunk, but not so hard that there's no possibility that the person will get it. But you, John, free reign. You can do whatever you
Okay.
want. You're a guest. The bar is.
I will tell you this, the statistic that I have is not from the most recent week, but it is the most recently published
Okay, that works.
statistic in
Yeah.
this series.
That's good.
Yeah, that works. That works. Hey, why don't we go with you first then? That sounds pretty intriguing.
All right.
Yeah, let's
So,
do that.
So here's the number, and
Okay.
this is no reference. I'm fresh to all of this. It's 1,691,000, and I'll say U.S. adults.
All right, so it's from the
1,000,000.
employment numbers.
What are the rules for confirming people's guesses? Is
You
this
say
like
yes.
yes,
Yes.
yes, correct.
All right.
Exactly
1,000,000.
right. So it's in the employment report?
Mhm.
Correct.
Oh,
Is
1,691,000.
it a change?
It's not a change. It's a
Okay,
level.
so it's a level. All right.
Something to do with it's in the household statistics, not in the.
it's in the
not
household
payroll.
servants. Correct.
The household survey is a survey of households is the basis for the unemployment rate and labor force, as opposed to the payroll survey, the survey of businesses. Okay, that makes sense.
Does that have anything to do with long-term versus short-term unemployment?
It does.
All right, I gotta figure out which one it is.
Yeah, that's the number.
The number of long-term.
It is. Wow. I am really, really impressed. That was more rapid than I could have guessed.
Very good. So when you say long term, that's the number of people that have been unemployed for more than
27 weeks or longer.
27 weeks.
And I think
Is that down? Oh, that's got to be down.
it's down. And I mean, the reason I picked it was just I thought, going back to February, March of 2020, I was anticipating some sort of prolonged period of long-term unemployment. And we have seen this just snap back in a way that is so different than what we saw in 2008 and 2009, where you had such persistently elevated levels of employment. I think part of that is on the labor force front, right? So that number sort of skews things because people just dropped out and stopped looking for work. But nonetheless, I think it's a sign of just taking a step back and remembering how robust this jobs recovery has been relative to some of the others.
Yeah, good point. Here we are 2 years after the pandemic hit, and the labor market's come not all the way back.
Not all the way
but
back.
It's getting there. I mean, and that's a good. Do you know what it was roughly before the pandemic? The number of long-term unemployed?
I think it was closer to I want to say 1.3, 1.4, something
Okay,
like that.
so
we're ballpark. Yeah, we're closing in.
We're closing in,
And that's not
good.
accounting for population growth too. So there's something there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I mean, I think if you add up, we're still at a 4% unemployment rate. We were 3.5% before the pandemic, and you consider all the folks that have stepped out of the workforce, even accounting for retirees that let's assume they don't come back, and then you consider the growth in the working age or the population, working age population since the pandemic hit. We're still down probably, I think, 4 or 5 million jobs. So, but if you do the arithmetic, we're creating 500,000 jobs per month. If we stay there for very long, certainly by the end of the year, we're there. We're at full employment. So it feels like we're getting there pretty fast. Okay, that was a good one. Okay,
That was a good one.
Yep.
I got mine. You
All
ready?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You ready?
Yep.
760,000 and 760,000. This is an amazing quinky dink in the data this week.
So it came out this week.
It did indeed.
Is it housing related?
It is indeed.
Okay, so you're stealing from Cris.
Well, that's why I wanted
no.
to go first. Because if I let him go, I might not be able
Yeah.
to use the statistic. Yeah.
So is
What housing
existing?
statistics came
Well,
out
we
this
got starts and existing home sales.
week? Okay, which is
So
it?
I'm thinking starts.
Yeah.
Starts. Very
All right.
good. Yeah.
760,000.
Yeah. this is-
Multifamily starts? No.
No,
No,
that's that was actually a little weak. I think
Yeah.
it was 450,000, something like that, annualized. we
Like how deep are you going? Are we going down into like permits
Regional-
We're
not
going
started?
pretty deep. We're going pretty deep, but not deep enough that you should not be able
You should
to.
know this.
You should
A
know this.
regional split. something
Okay,
like
add the two together and you get 1.54 million. Maybe
Mhm.
that start ringing a bell. A bell. 1.54 million. I think it's 1.54 million. Does that add
Well,
up?
starts were like 1.65.
Six. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not
that-
starts.
All right, permits.
No, that was
No,
higher.
no.
All
Gotta
right,
be
we gotta go
creative.
deeper. Like
Completions.
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 Oh, you guys, yeah, this is pathetic.
Under construction.
Under construction,
It's gotta be under-
baby.
we're gonna get there. There's only
there
so
we
many
go.
things that-
Under construction. That's
Yeah.
right. So this 1.54 million homes are under construction. 760,000 of which are single family. 760,000 of which are multifamily. That's the
Oh, that's a
first
good one.
time. It's unbelievable. It's
I missed that.
uncanny.
Wow.
It's uncanny. And neither the all-time record high 50 years ago, briefly in the early 70s, you find a time when there were so many homes under construction. And I may have this wrong. Someone in the listener world will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that actually includes the homes that have been permitted but not have actually begun construction. So
Correct. That's correct.
That's
yeah.
a separate.
It so happens I was speaking with the chief economist of the Mortgage Bankers Association today, and that was the
What
big
the heck are you
divide
talking-
there.
You're talking to Frat
Right.
and Tony?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the big. I mean, it's a record high.
You're not trying to hire him, are you, John? You're
No,
trying to
no,
hire
no,
Mike
just-
and Tony from MBA?
Just trying to learn.
Oh my gosh.
Trying to learn and
Jeez
understand
Louise.
what's going on.
You
And,
can't keep
they're
your grimy
growing,
hands
growing
on these
fast.
guys. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a
Go
big
ahead.
issue. Housing is a big issue. There's a lot of homes out there, and people just flat out aren't starting them because they know that they don't have all the supplies they need.
Yeah.
They don't have the lumber, they don't have the people, and it doesn't pay for them to start. And so it's
The
a real
garage
problem.
door.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. There's lumber.
Yeah.
It's just
Crazy.
expensive.
Yeah.
Really expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, actually,
you-
I think the backlog's even more than that. I was talking to, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast, but I was talking to a multifamily developer, a pretty good sized developer in California. And he was telling me he's not even starting projects because he's fearful that he starts and then he can't get to the finish line on, with the schedule because he can't get whatever it is, a plumbing fixture or something. So he's not even going to start projects until he has a clear line of sight to the end of the project. So the backlog may be even more. But I think that's an important statistic. I mean, I think we obviously 1.54 million, just for context, I think the underlying rate of single family, multifamily starts is about 1.7 million. So that's almost that's almost 1 year's worth of supply sitting in the pipeline that will come. And I think, once the supply chain issues start to iron themselves out, and I expect that to happen over the course of the year, we're going to see a lot of supply, and which we need, obviously. And that should help it should help with house prices and affordability. It should also help with rent growth, which is key to inflation, obviously CPI inflation. Won't help for this year, probably won't help for 2023, but by mid-decade, I think we're going to see a lot more housing. Cris, I just said a lot there, and you have strong views, I think,
Yeah.
on this issue. You want to push back on any of what I just said?
It's a good
But
story.
by the way, that wasn't your statistic, right? I picked.
it
the
was not my
statistic.
statistic.
Okay.
I know I stuck to the rules. Made
Oh,
it survey
wow.
related.
Oh,
How is that
no,
survey
no.
related? Morning
No,
consult.
no, it
What
doesn't
is
have to be. Hey, Ryan, does it have to be survey related?
no, no,
that's
no.
not
to
one
the
of
big
rules.
topic.
Housing's still
The big-
consumer.
All right.
You can make that link.
All right.
Yeah.
It's a survey of permitting issuing
Oh, fair
places.
Fair enough.
Exactly.
Oh, and they changed some methodology there. That was
did they?
important. Yeah.
Oh,
you
we
should
didn't know
Take a
that.
look.
Okay. All right.
Hey, did you see before? Sorry, Chris. In the housing starts data for December,
Yeah,
permits jumped in the Northeast,
I
and it
saw
was
that.
because of Philadelphia.
I know that we
Yeah.
have a huge.
I was like, Philadelphia gets a big shout out.
Okay, Cris, you're up.
I think it's a good story.
Good story.
it's,
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, I think it all fits. I just don't think we have the capacity to build that much.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think we can get up there
Oh, in the next year.
as
you mean.
quickly in the next year, 2 years even.
Okay.
And then you have interest rates rising. I think that's going to take a bite out of some of this activity as well. So I think
Oh,
it'll
you
remain
think-
strong.
Yeah.
I think building's going to remain strong for next 5-10 years easily, just because of all the tailwinds from the demographics. But I don't think the industry has that capacity. Who's going to build these homes?
You know why he's saying this, John? Because I think we have a bet.
that-
Don't we have a bet?
Is that right?
We do have a bet.
Do
What's
we
the
have a bet?
over under?
Well,
1.7 million average. I just looked this up. That's how I know.
yeah. Is it this year?
1.7 million average over 21 and 22. 2021.
Oh, and I need 1.8
Oh.
million for that to work.
Yeah.
And what did you say?
I took the under.
Yeah, the under is a good
That-
one.
Yeah, you took the under. Yeah, well, how rude.
So
Okay. All right. I hear you. Okay.
We'll see.
Okay. Who hasn't gone yet? Ryan, you're up.
All right, these numbers are perfect, all right, because it ties in what we're talking about in the big topic, and then also everything else for the most part that we talked about: supply chains, inflation. These are good. Mark, oh, so John, Mark's been on a hot run, so we gotta bring him back down to
We
earth.
do have a
Reel 'em
cowbell. I
We
was
have-
not
if
joking.
you get
about
these
the
right,
cowbell.
I'll give you the double cowbell. We have two cowbells.
Oh, really? Okay.
All right, so the first one is positive 12.5%,
Oh, so you're not going to give us the second one? Or are
and
they
the second
independent?
one is minus 21.3 or 22.3.
So the first,
Oh,
are they? These are related, obviously.
Different
No.
reports, but they
Oh.
are tied together. One is causing the other.
And one is causing the other. Okay.
Mhm.
Is it inflation
12.5.
related?
It's not
Is it from?
inflation related.
It's not from the CPI.
That's not the
Retail
CPI. It came out this
sales?
week. I'm
Is
sorry.
it retail
Oh, this week,
sales?
yeah.
It's retail sales. I'll give you a
Okay.
hint. It's
Oh,
not month to month. It's not year over year.
Yes.
It's a different way to looking at it, but it hammers home the point.
It's not month over month. It's not year over year.
not a
Mm-mm.
change.
And it's overall, it's total retail sales is not some component of retail sales. It's
No,
a
it's you
transformation.
gotta. It's what goes into GDP.
Oh, control retail sales.
Okay. Now what's the 12.5%?
Oh, the control retail sales, by the way, is total retail sales X auto, X gasoline, X building materials, because the building materials go into residential investment. So that control, what they call control retail sales, drives consumer spending.
And it takes out restaurants.
Oh yeah, it takes out restaurants. So 12.5%. That's not year over year control retail sales.
No,
Huh.
think about when you go to the mall. You go to the map, and it says you
Yeah.
are here. There's your hint.
Yeah. Boy,
And this
does
is
that help you, Chris? You know that, yeah. Yeah. When's the last
All
time
right.
you were
Oh,
in
you
the
guys are
mall
suffering.
anyway?
Yeah.
I haven't been in a mall in a long time. Yeah.
we wrote about this on the site. So it 12.5%. That's the level of control retail sales above its pre-pandemic trend. So that's it's
Oh.
enormous.
It's a
That's how-
shift. And it's a permanent shift.
No, I don't think it's permanent.
No.
I think it's going to come back because we're going to
Yeah.
get services spending picking up over the next couple of
Right.
years. So you'll see goods. There's only so much stuff we can buy. It will come back down.
Well, the
But
down
that gap-
minus 21% is on the that can't be on the service side, is it? No.
It's not.
Uh,
But we're
is it in
buying
the
a lot
re-
of stuff.
Is it in the retail sales numbers too?
It's not.
Oh, okay.
Got to go
But-
different
but-
survey.
But the 12.5, you're saying, look, that's we've got, because people are sheltering in place, they spend a lot of their money on stuff, but
Mhm.
they spend a lot. Oh, is it like spending on movie tickets?
It's not
Spending
spending
on
related.
Broadway plays? Spending
Yeah,
on,
think
All games.
we get 2 regional manufacturing surveys.
oh, we
this
did
week.
Philly Fed.
Philly
and-
Fed, very good.
Yeah. And I don't know what the other one, Richmond Fed, maybe? I'm not sure.
Empire State, so the New York Fed.
Empire
Oh yeah,
State.
You're
Okay.
that's right.
But it's in the Philly Fed. You're getting close.
Oh, down 21.5. I don't know. What is it?
It is the expectations 6 months ahead of supply chain deliveries or supplier deliveries. So when
Oh,
it's
so-
negative, it means
Oh.
purchasing manufacturers are expecting faster deliveries. This is
Oh,
the
great.
lowest it's been
Yeah.
since 2008. So
That's
even though we're buying a
great
lot of stuff,
statistic.
Yeah.
expectations are supply chain problems are going to start to ease. So
Hey,
tied in spending with supply chains, which means inflation is going to begin to decelerate.
Hey, Ron. This is something that's bothering me. Related.
Mhm.
Inventory accumulation is booming because
Yes.
one of the other statistics that came out this week was business inventory, manufacturing,
Yep.
retail, wholesale, skyward. And I think the inventory to sales ratio, which is a kind of a good measure of your level of inventory, it's actually moving up and pretty high. Yeah. So what's going on? I mean, why are we having shortages, or are we having shortages? I mean, I can't square the circle that people are saying I can't get this stuff, but it's like we got enormous inventory build, going on.
Well, the
do you have any
inventory
st-
bill, like the IS ratios are going up for wholesalers and retailers. It's pretty flat for manufacturers. So
Okay.
it
That
differs.
never, yeah, okay.
But
Oh, you're
I
saying the
think
shortages are in manufacturing. They're not
It's
in,
which stuff? Yeah.
oh, okay.
right.
Yeah.
Like vehicles, you got a shortage, but that's
Yeah.
in manufacturing. Okay, that's
That's
what you're
a
saying.
manufacturing
Building
problem.
materials. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it feels
exactly.
like all the data is accumulating, suggesting strongly, and this is because of your supply chain stress index, which is a compilation of a lot of these statistics, that things are starting to move in the right direction on the supply chains.
They are. And I think it's a good sign that businesses are increasing their inventories, because that's going to take additional stress off the supply chain, because they're not going to have to book as many orders, in a few months to replenish their shelves or their manufacturing plants. So
Hey, John, so
I can speak to
I was
that
turning
directly.
to
For
you,
the,
yeah,
on the
right.
US side, I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing across all the major spending categories, that, when consumers go to make these purchases, it's not that they've actually, the prevalence of supply chain issues has fallen, but rather that the growth rate is essentially gone to zero. So it looks like we've kind of reached some, peak supply chain disruption essentially. And that's, groceries, new and used cars, clothing and apparel. The only area, and this is maybe, I guess if we're US focused here, then we can scrap this, Ben, but the only area where we're seeing dramatic supply chain issues is in Australia, of all places. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but
No.
they've got extreme labor shortages, a flood that wiped out a lot of their transportation, and the grocery shelves are just essentially bare there. And so we saw a 26 percentage point increase in the share of Australians who said in January that they couldn't go buy the food that they were looking for in grocery stores.
I had not heard that. That's
No.
fascinating. So in the surveys you've been doing, you ask consumers about what shortages they're facing.
That's right. So if they,
And-
yeah.
So, and what you're finding is that people are increasingly not experiencing shortages. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I wouldn't go that far quite yet. I would say just
Okay.
that the growth rate has essentially slowed. So we
I
saw,
see.
September to October, things got worse. October to November, things were worse. And then all of a sudden, like December to January, we've seen it essentially hold constant, particularly for some of these goods that early on in the pandemic were like, driving a lot of the supply chain shortage. I think about used cars. And it's unclear to me if that's because there are more used cars or if there's just fewer people, consumers have essentially internalized that there's such a, supply constraint that they're not going out and trying to make those purchases.
Oh, I see. And so your sense is, of course, we'll have to see what happens here, but your sense is that this might be an inflection point.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
And
right.
that your survey should start to show fewer and fewer people reporting I'm experiencing shortages for whatever it is going
As a
forward.
share of total people looking to make that purchase.
Yeah.
So if you
And
go
can-
look at, sorry.
Can you give me a sense of magnitude? So like what percent of your survey saying I'm suffering, some form of shortage?
So I think like on the, on the high end, we're seeing like grocery sales, grocery and food items, which in January was really high. 47% of adults who tried to go buy groceries said they encountered that the item wasn't stocked, and that's up from 41% in November. But then if you go down to something like, newer used cars, it's like 28%, and that's essentially flat over the past 6 months.
Well, my wife, every time she comes back from the grocery store, she complains bitterly she can't find onion salt. Do you have any idea what onion salt is? I have no idea.
what
Why
do you
does
use
it
onion
big
salt
Feels
for?
antiquated. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is we're tracking not only whether or not there's a supply chain disruption, but also how are people responding to it. And we
Mhm.
do see overwhelmingly that women are less likely to be willing to pay more for something that's, where they're experiencing elevated prices than men. And the same is true with urban people. Urban adults are willing to go out there and pay the extra money to get the thing. And that's
Now,
not true
isn't
for
that
suburban and urban
fascinating?
adults.
What's the intuition behind that, do you think? Do you have an intuition about men, women, and their
I
different
think part of it
attitudes?
has to come down to what they're out to purchase.
Okay.
And, I think we see a lot of the, that women still disproportionately go do a lot of the large grocery shopping.
Yeah.
And so if
Well,
so go ahead.
It may be that at least now it's all about me, John, as you know. So from my experience, I don't buy many things. So if I want to buy something, that's like a deal. Like I
Yeah,
don't
right.
care. Just give it to me
Right.
as fast as you possibly can. I don't care if it's double the price. My wife's buying lots of stuff all the time, so that maybe that's what
right.
partly what's going
Is
on.
that by choice or decision? Because you go out and when you buy stuff, you buy 2 of everything. So why do you have 2 power washers? Like that, your spending should be revoked right there.
Yeah, that I have
don't-
a hard time explaining that there's something going on there deep down
You have-
psychologically.
You have 2 of everything? You have duplicates of everything in your
No,
house?
he's making that
No.
up. He's
Oh,
making
okay.
that up.
But
But I
you
do
know,
have
you
2
have 2
power
power-
washers.
Yeah.
And I don't.
There's some sort of inner fear there. That
and I
you're
really don't
afraid
know
of
why.
someday, yeah.
I really don't know why. But I think Ryan joked, or somebody joked that I bought one to wash the other.
The other, yeah.
Hey, while we're on this subject, I think you've also done a fair amount of work on inflation expectations.
That's right,
Trying to-
yeah.
Can you describe? Because I think you're working on a special measure or a new
That's right,
measure.
yeah. Yeah,
I'd
so
love to
for
hear
the
about
last year and a half, we've been partnering with researchers from the Cleveland Federal Reserve to try to think about a new way of measuring inflation expectations. And so really trying to understand basically how people think about inflation. So what we're doing is we're going out there and asking people how much their income would have to increase or decrease to make up for changes in prices of goods and services that they see. And so we're in the US, it's 20,000 people every week. So it's just, again, high frequency inflation expectations. Looking at the 12-month time horizon, we see a really dramatic increase, but it looks to me like we've sort of plateaued starting in December and January. Again, there was some sort of inflection point that the rate of growth is slowed. But globally, we continue to see inflation expectations increase pretty dramatically in places like Turkey. I mean, the places where you would expect it to happen, places like Turkey, Russia, and Argentina, they were all sort of month over month. They showed really large increases in inflation expectations.
You know, we have this. There's this debate been raging about, or at least it's raging in my own mind, about the source of inflation, whether it's demand or supply. And of course, it's both demand and supply.
It's both, right?
Yeah, no one's arguing that. But predominantly this uncomfortably high inflation we're suffering through right now, whether that's supply driven, we talked about global supply chains and labor markets, as opposed to demand driven, which I would argue this time last year when we got the vaccines and people started spending and we had the American Rescue Plan and that helped people spend, that was more about demand, but now it feels more like supply. In any of your survey or in your survey work or any of your own thoughts around that debate, I'm really curious what you think about that, if you have some views on that.
I think on the demand front, we continue to see that spending is sort of over allocated towards goods relative to services. That I think a lot of us had expected by now that we would start seeing more and more people move away from these large sort of durable goods purchases and into the services sector. And that just flat out hasn't happened. And so it's not super surprising to me that there's a concentrated amount of money chasing these relatively few goods. And it just so happens that they tend to be the ones that are also affected by these supply chain issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would expect, what we're starting to see is that consumers are growing more and more comfortable going out to in-person activities.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in DC here, they're removing the mask mandate, they're removing the vaccination mandate. I think the same is true in New York and some of the other large metro areas. So I'm expecting this summer to start seeing like a real boom in the services sector. And I think that's going to ease some of the supply price pressures. Yeah.
Price pressures. Yeah.
Travel bookings are up, right?
Are
Wherever
they?
you see it. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Let me throw in my statistic here.
Oh
It's
yeah,
relevant.
I'm sorry, Chris. I nearly
No,
forgot.
No,
Yeah,
no
sorry.
problem.
We still
This is going to be a
See, he really
overhanded
wanted to
softball.
play. He wouldn't even,
Yeah.
couldn't wait. Go ahead.
3.5%.
3.5.
Is it housing?
Nope, it's not housing.
Not housing, not housing.
3.5%. It's a statistic that came out this week.
This week.
In the
This
retail
week.
sales numbers,
Nope.
industrial production.
No, it is a survey.
Oh, sir.
Oh, okay. It's a survey.
Very relevant to what John just said.
Yeah, he's laughing. Ha ha ha. I did the right statistic.
Is this the New York Fed inflation expectations?
Oh,
You got
yeah.
it.
The
You got
3 year ahead.
Mhm.
That's right. 3 year ahead, 3.5. It fell by half a
Oh, I saw that. It
percentage
did
point.
fall,
Yeah.
which is a
So-
little weird. It feels like it's
Or-
rolled over too. If you look at a graph of it, it feels
Seems
like
like
it's rolled
it.
over. which
Yeah,
is a little odd.
both the 1 year and the 3 year ahead
Yeah.
rolled over. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
only 1 point, but
Yeah.
may
It's,
suggest that consumers are switching behavior or they don't expect this inflation to persist. So,
particularly in the context of higher gasoline prices, which you would have thought just the opposite, right? Because feels near-term consumer expectations around inflation feel so dominated by the movements in gas prices, at least to
Yeah.
me.
I mean, I think it's gas and groceries, though. I think it's both.
Oh,
I mean, we
groceries.
saw that in the CPI, right? The grocery prices are, skyrocketing, contributing to CPI as well.
Yeah, good point. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that's
I found it
encouraging.
interesting. Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
a good
no,
one.
very interesting. That is a good one. Yeah, very good. Hey, John, are there other sort of survey-based insights in what's going on in the
Oh,
economy that
man.
you want to share? I'm just really curious.
Yeah,
What
so
would you
many.
put at the top of the list? Yeah.
So I would put at the top of the list our January measure of financial vulnerability. So we measure every month the share of adults who lack savings to cover their basic expenses for a full month. And it kind of hovered around 22%. Every time there was some stimulus injection, it fell. And then all of a sudden in January, it skyrocketed up to 29%. It's the highest level since we've been collecting it over the past 2 years. And for me, it just sort of highlighted exactly what's at stake. While we're moving beyond COVID, we just don't have the policy support in place to provide some of those folks who are still losing their job with additional, financing. And when you pair that with elevated inflation, elevated costs, I think that there's a group of people out there that's really suffering, and that number, the total savings rate or savings to income ratio, I think doesn't really reflect the fact that there's a group of people out there who are not making a lot of money, and they're really starting to eat into whatever savings they might have had.
And that statistic is the percent of respondents that say they don't have enough to pay for all their bills in that given month.
Correct.
Right. That feels like child tax credit, right? Because that expired in January, and that would not be surprising to me that you'd see 5-6 percentage points more of folks saying I can't pay my bills as a result of that.
It very well could be. When we looked at historically, there was a pretty big bump when the $600 federal unemployment insurance benefits expired last year. And then this year we had the $300 benefit expire in September, and we didn't really see a move in the number. It was just kind of plodding along at 22%. And then all of a sudden in January, it skyrocketed. I think in February, it's likely to come back down a little bit. We haven't had, the weekly unemployment insurance numbers have not been as high as they were in January. So I don't think that there are disruptions to the income like there were before. And then I think the other thing to note is maybe just we're tracking the share of part-time workers who want to work full-time. And that number continues to rise. It has risen every month since June. I think we're up now to something like 55 or 60%. So it's been up from 30 or 35% in June. So there's a lot of these part-time workers want to work full-time and they can't quite figure out how to do it. They've got childcare issues, healthcare. I mean, there are all these sort of binding constraints that are preventing them, but there's something to be said about the sort of intensive margin, that there are people who are working a little bit, they'd like to be contributing more hours.
Well, it doesn't sound like, do you know, is this because there aren't full-time jobs? It doesn't feel like that would be the case.
I don't think that's the case. No.
Yeah, they just can't get their lives in a place where they can actually work full-time.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
What else? Maybe the last thing that's interesting is the global recovering confidence. So we're tracking the largest 15 global economies, and since July of this past year, 2021, that was sort of the peak of the GDP weighted recovery in consumer confidence. And every month since then, we've seen a gradual decline. So this idea that we're going to kind of continue to bounce back in perpetuity, I think, is behind us. And that's started with Delta, then moved to Omicron, and then inflation. We've just had this sort of litany of factors that have weighed on the global front, I think, a lot more than we maybe appreciate here. In the US, we had Delta and Omicron, and those were separate things. In Europe, that was basically one
big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, just one last sort of broad question, because you joined Morning Consult and started looking at the data prior to the pandemic. Do you get a sense generally that the pandemic is kind of weighing on the collective psyche? I mean, that people just inherently are just generally more pessimistic than they were pre-pandemic, or can you tell that from your work?
I mean, certainly the levels remain well below what they were in
Yeah.
2019 and 18. That people, there's a smaller share of the population that believes that they'll be better off financially a year from now than they are currently, and so I think that's a lot of it. And then I think what we continue to see is just how differently people across this country have experienced the pandemic. That, we talk about the average American, but I just think that under $50,000 annual income group is not going to bounce back from this pandemic.
Yeah.
Economically, I should say.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, Cris, any questions for John?
Yeah, just on that last note, one thing I find interesting from the University of Michigan survey is the political divide, right? So yeah, we have confidence way down, but it's driven by the Republicans, right? There's a very vast chasm between the two, and I wonder how that figures into your thinking around the survey results. We mentioned the difference between the soft data, people saying they're not confident, but then going out and spending anyway. Is that political divide something you think is getting more intense in the survey results, or any thoughts about that?
There was so in general, there's a level difference. So you can see that Democrats are in general more confident in the economy than Republicans, and that's even after controlling for things like income.
Right.
But if you do, a rolling 30-day % change or something like that, those trends are right on top of each other. And so what was really interesting is we started to see in that trend line a divergence starting in August and September. One could argue that that's driven by politics, but as it so happens, a higher share of older Americans are Republican, and a higher share of Republicans live in the middle of the country. And both of those groups are groups that were disproportionately affected by rising prices. And so I think, it's hard for me to say, conclusively that that's a political phenomenon and not driven by the reality of inflation affecting different groups of the, different population cohorts differently.
A good point. I guess what gives me pause is if you go back historically, you look around elections, it flips. Whoever's in the White House,
that's right.
Suddenly my opinion has changed the next day, right? Before any policies, before the person's actually in office, right? I'm feeling more confident.
I mean, it's like clockwork. It's like as soon as the election happens, there's this total reversal. Again, it's one of the reasons why I just almost exclusively look at some sort of change over time. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah,
and it's not just consumers. If you look at the small business confidence survey, and NFIB,
for sure,
small businesses are very pessimistic about the economy's prospects with a Democrat in office, and then it flips if there's a Republican. So it's not just consumers. So one question or thought I had was around that financial vulnerability. We're in tax season, and the average tax refund so far is $800 less than what was the average last year. And again, that's to Mark's point about the child tax credit. So maybe it comes back down in February, but so far refunds are averaging a lot less than what we've seen over the last few years. So that might keep it elevated for a period of time.
What do you think is driving that? Is that just because incomes are down?
I think it's the child tax credit
because people
you can't deduct all of it.
They can't deduct all of it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that makes that was
It'll be
interesting.
We looked at it, and what it looked like to us when we looked at people who received the child tax credit was that it tended to disproportionately go to higher income people because they have more kids. I know that's a super counterintuitive group, but if you look at this 100 to 150,000 annual income group, those are the people who tend to be married and they tend to have more kids. And so they get their check was larger than lower income people. It's not to say that a smaller dollar value could be more valuable for lower income people and helping them to pay their bills, but just in terms of the sheer dollar value, it looked to us like it was going towards slightly higher income folks.
Although the percent of children that have been lifted out of poverty is pretty impressive.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Were lifted out of poverty, I should say. But Well, John, I want to thank you. This was very thoughtful and insightful. So what's your mood like? How are you feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I feel pretty good. We spoke about this. I went into the office for the first time this week. And so I'm feeling pretty good that we're going to get back and live some sort of new normal life.
Yep. Fantastic. And Cris is already back in. He needs some company though. Ryan, are you going back in anytime soon?
Going Friday. I'm going to see Cris on Friday.
All right.
Oh, okay.
We might do
Is
the
this-
podcast in the conference room together. Huh?
Live.
two of you?
Wow.
We could do it
there you
live.
go.
Wow.
Okay. Very good. Well, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer for me. I'm still safely ensconced in Florida, so I'll be back soon though.
The
It's
weather's
getting warmer
nice
here.
Yeah,
Here.
it's warming up.
50s
Yeah.
today. I'm
Yeah,
just
but
saying it's like
Mark's threshold is
75
what?
out here right now, sunny, and I won't
All
even show
right.
you.
All right.
What's your threshold, Mark? What's the temperature have to be to get you back up to Philly?
Kind of, sort of like 70. I mean, geez.
Okay.
Yeah, that might do it.
So we'll see in April or May.
Yeah, April or May.
Yeah.
Well, at Mark Zandi, just saying. John, what's your Twitter handle?
At John C. Leer.
There you go. And Mr. Ryan
At realtime_econ.
and Cris, what's your? I know you have.
Find me
that
on
handle.
LinkedIn. Find me on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah, he's a LinkedIn maven. And any suggestions about future podcasts, please let us know. You can go to economy.com and vote and let us know what you want us to chat about, and we will certainly do that. And with that, we'll call this a podcast. Take care, everyone.